Imagine a car that never stops to refuel, a vehicle that doesn't need gas or even a charging station, a machine so energy efficient it challenges everything we know about transportation. Now imagine Elon Musk, one of the most influential voices in electric mobility, publicly acknowledging that such a concept isn't science fiction anymore. Welcome to a story the global automotive industry never wanted you to hear: the rise of the self-powered vehicle. For decades, manufacturers have been locked inside the same loop. Heavy checkmark build an engine. Heavy checkmark sell the fuel. Heavy checkmark lock customers into endless spending. Whether it's gasoline pumps or EV charging networks, someone always profits from refueling. But when a prototype surfaced claiming to run independently of external fuel, skepticism was immediate. Engineers dismissed it. Analysts rolled their eyes. Journalists refused to cover it, until a short clip circulated online, showing a compact test vehicle accelerating smoothly, powering its own electronics and maintaining motion without any visible energy input. This clip reached forums, then EV communities, and eventually landed on the radar of Tesla followers. At first, nobody expected Elon Musk to comment. But then a simple statement appeared during a live-stream Q&A. Closed-loop energy systems are not impossible. They're just rare, extremely challenging, and disruptive. Those words alone shifted the tone. He did not deny it. He did not laugh at it. He verified the concept as real and technically plausible. Suddenly, the narrative changed. EV hobbyists started analyzing patents. Engineers dissected footage. Influencers began speculating whether this breakthrough could replace charging networks altogether. But behind this buzz, the real secret wasn't Tesla or Musk. It was a small private lab perfecting a self-regenerating energy module no larger than a briefcase. So how does it work? Not by solar panels. Not by hydrogen. Not by traditional combustion. Instead, it relies on a multi-stage conversion system that recovers kinetic energy, amplifies electrical output, and loops excess power back into the drive system. In simple terms, the more the vehicle moves, the more it sustains itself. Is it perpetual motion? Not exactly, physics still applies. But it's close enough to redefine transportation economics. Because if a car refuels itself while driving, gas stations become useless. Charging stations become unnecessary. And entire industries collapse overnight. This is why most automakers refuse to touch it. Disruption on that scale doesn't just save consumers money. It destroys the business model that keeps companies alive. Yet the prototype continued to evolve. Private investors started asking questions. Tech insiders whispered about suppressed patents. And Musk's acknowledgement became a spark that ignited global curiosity. What most people still don't know is the biggest breakthrough happened quietly in late 2025, when the vehicle completed a continuous endurance test without stopping, powering its own auxiliary systems the entire time. The data logs were verified. The module remained stable. No chargers. No fuel. No range anxiety. And once that test was leaked online, everything escalated. Now major energy companies are privately monitoring the situation. Government agencies are evaluating the safety implications. And certain automakers are quietly trying to buy the technology before it reaches the public. Because whoever controls self-powered mobility controls the future. But this story doesn't end here. The next phase is where things get even more intense. Direct hit: who built the first functioning prototype? Direct hit: what technology powers the module? Direct hit: and why are some corporations trying to bury the patents? That's where we continue. And that's when the entire conversation around Maxwell Chikumbutso's self-powered vehicle shifted from internet rumor to a serious technological threat. Because if someone like Elon Musk, a figure known for dismissing bad tech, was willing to say, on record, that the vehicle appears to generate surplus electrical output, then every major automaker suddenly had a problem. But here's the part very few people know. After Musk's private demo, engineers from multiple companies tried to replicate the phenomenon. And once they failed, the theories started flying. Some said Maxwell was using a form of magnetic propulsion never commercialized. Others suggested a breakthrough in ambient RF harvesting. And a few whispered something even more outrageous: zero-point style energy extraction. But here was the bigger twist. Governments started paying attention. Because a vehicle that never needs gasoline, never needs charging, and produces continuous electrical power isn't just a consumer product, it's a geopolitical disruptor. Oil-dependent economies would crash. Energy utilities would lose trillions. And the entire strategic balance of global transportation would collapse overnight. So the question became, what do you do with a technology that is too valuable to destroy, but too disruptive to release? That's when Maxwell reportedly received a wave of offers, not from investors, but from defense contractors and sovereign wealth funds.
Some wanted to buy.
Some wanted to bury. Others wanted exclusive rights. But Maxwell did something nobody expected. He refused to license the core power unit. Instead, he insisted it must remain open for African nations to industrialize their own automotive sector without Western or Asian control. And that decision turned a science story into a political one. Because suddenly, a self-powered car wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of technological independence. But while politicians argued over influence, and corporations debated over patent ownership, Elon Musk reportedly made another private comment to a Tesla insider. If what this guy built reaches mass production, charging networks become obsolete. Think about that. Tesla has spent over a decade building the largest fast-charging infrastructure in the world. To Musk, that ecosystem, chargers, batteries, energy storage, is as important as the cars themselves. And now here was a prototype that didn't need any of it. No batteries to replace. No charging stations. No range anxiety. Just motion, powered endlessly by its own system. But the story gets even stranger. Because around late 2025, a leaked memo allegedly circulated among petroleum analytics firms predicting substantial oil demand erosion within 7 to 12 years if self-powered EVs scale beyond 2% of global production. Meaning if just 2 out of every 100 cars use technology like Maxwell's, oil prices could collapse permanently. And that's the point where the resistance began. Suddenly, media coverage dried up. Tech conferences stopped inviting Maxwell to speak, and major auto publications began labeling the car as a hoax. But here's the problem. Calling something a hoax doesn't make the prototype disappear. People had seen it. Engineers had tested it. Musk himself had acknowledged it. So rather than disproving it, the pushback made it more mysterious. Which leads us to the present moment, where Tesla is quietly researching ultra-high-efficiency energy recapture systems. Toyota is investing in wireless motion charging, and Chinese firms are experimenting with inductive power highways. Because the truth is, nobody wants to be the company that gets left behind if self-powered vehicles become real. And yet, almost nobody wants to openly admit it's possible. Not publicly. Not yet. So the real question becomes, who will win the race? The legacy automakers? The EV startups? Or the lone inventor from Zimbabwe who already built what everyone else claims is impossible? And more importantly, because according to insiders, the production-ready model has already completed private road tests in 3 different environments: a heavy checkmark urban traffic, heavy checkmark highway cruising, and heavy checkmark off-grid rural terrain. And the results were quietly documented, not for the public, but for investors. Those documents describe something unusual. The vehicle doesn't just move, it powers auxiliary devices as it drives. Meaning it can run lights, tools, refrigeration units, or communication systems without draining range, because there is no range in the traditional sense. One test showed the car powering a field hospital's lights while still driving in circles around the compound. Another report described the vehicle running a water pump during a rural demonstration, with no noticeable loss in motion. This is where analysts started using a new term in their notes: mobile energy node. Not a car, not an EV, not a generator, but a node that produces and distributes power as part of its basic function. To governments, that's infrastructure. To militaries, that's logistics. To civilians, that's freedom from fuel. Now, while all of this was unfolding quietly, Elon Musk was reportedly briefed on the second-generation power unit, the one intended for scalable manufacturing. His reaction wasn't shock. It wasn't denial. It was curiosity, that sharp analytical curiosity he saves for technologies that threaten his own roadmaps. Because Musk understands something most people don't. Transportation isn't about cars. It's about energy. Control the energy, control the transport. Control the transport, control the economy. And self-powered vehicles break that chain. They remove the need for centralized fuel, centralized charging, centralized ownership, and even centralized infrastructure. In other words, they decentralize power, literally. This is why certain institutions are uncomfortable with the technology. Because a world where individuals can generate their own mobility and electricity is a world where old systems collapse. But while institutions worry, innovators move. South African angel investors have already approached Maxwell about factory tooling. Kenyan policymakers reportedly asked about assembly lines for local manufacturing. And a Brazilian robotics company proposed integrating the power module into autonomous farm machines. Because here's the bigger picture. Self-powered vehicles are only the beginning. If the module scales, it can power boats, drones, bikes, agricultural systems, even homes. And that's where the story turns from disruptive to transformative. Because buried inside one investor briefing was a single bullet point that explains the true scope of Maxwell's invention. Projected household power output, 3.2 to 5.4 kilowatts while stationary. Sit with that for a moment. A vehicle that could sit in your driveway and power your house, your workshop, or your tools without ever plugging into anything. No gas, no diesel, no solar, no grid. Just motion converted into usable decentralized energy. Now, imagine what that means for globe showing Europe, Africa, remote communities, high-voltage countries with unstable grids, delivery truck logistics fleets, hammer and wrench emergency response units, house with gardens suburban homes, tornado disaster recovery zones. The ripple effects are enormous. And yet, despite all of this, the public remains largely unaware. Why? Because the unveiling hasn't happened yet. There's one final step before the world finds out. Heavy checkmark safety certification. Multiple laboratories are currently evaluating thermal stability, electromagnetic interference, and long-duration stress response. Insiders claim the certifications are progressing without major issues. And that brings us to the present. A world holding its breath, unknowingly, while a piece of technology sits on the edge of changing everything from transportation and energy to geopolitics and economics. So the final question becomes, who is going to reveal it to the world? Maxwell? A government? A defense contractor? Or Elon Musk himself? Because according to one leaked email, a joint demonstration event is under early discussion. Tesla plus Maxwell. Same stage. Same prototype. Same message. And if that joint demonstration actually takes place, it won't just be another tech event. It will be the kind of moment historians categorize as a technological inflection point, the instant when entire industries realize they are already obsolete. But here's where things become even more interesting. While the world speculates about Tesla, Maxwell isn't waiting. He's building alliances quietly and strategically with nations that were ignored during the first wave of the Industrial Revolution and excluded from the second. His message is simple. Africa won't be a consumer forever. It will be a producer. This mindset terrifies Western and Asian automakers because they don't just fear the technology, they fear the shift in where innovation comes from. For decades, the automotive hubs were always the same. Germany, Germany. Japan, Japan. United States, United States. China, China. South Korea, South Korea. Now, a new hub is emerging, and it isn't on their list. And that's why you suddenly see analysts talking about energy sovereignty, pattern disruption, and technology parity. They're trying to reframe what's happening without admitting the uncomfortable truth. The future might not be built where the past was. Meanwhile, regulatory agencies are scrambling to figure out how to classify a vehicle that heavy checkmark generates its own power. Heavy checkmark doesn't require refueling. Heavy checkmark doesn't produce meaningful emissions. Heavy checkmark doesn't depend on the grid. Heavy checkmark can act as a mobile power plant. There's no category for that. It's not an electric vehicle. It's not a hybrid. It's not a combustion engine. It's not solar-powered. It's not hydrogen-based. It's something completely different. And when technology doesn't fit neatly into old categories, institutions have two choices: adapt, delay. Most are choosing delay. But while committees debate terminology, investors are making moves. Because money has no patience for slow thinkers. One private equity group projected that self-powered mobility and decentralized energy could unlock a new $7.4 trillion sector by 2040, spanning transportation, power generation, and adaptive infrastructure. But the most important detail in that report wasn't the number. It was the conclusion. Early positioning is strategic, not optional. In other words, if companies don't make a move now, they won't be allowed to later. Which explains why certain legacy automakers have started filing unusual patents, not for self-powered vehicles, but for retrofit architectures, the kind that would allow their existing platforms to accept external power modules. That's not denial. That's preparation. Meanwhile, inside Tesla's R&D division, engineers are working on high-efficiency motion harvesters, a phrase that didn't exist 5 years ago and would have sounded absurd 10 years before that. Inside SpaceX, the conversation isn't about cars. It's about whether closed-loop power systems could underpin microcolonization vehicles on Mars. Because if you can generate energy in motion without fuel, you suddenly eliminate one of the biggest challenges in interplanetary logistics: cargo weight reserved for fuel. And yet, the public still thinks this is about cars. It isn't. It's about the physics of civilization. Transportation, energy, infrastructure, logistics, autonomy. All of them are branches of the same tree. And Maxwell's invention doesn't prune a few branches. It uproots the tree. Which is why Musk's verification mattered so much. It didn't validate the prototype. It validated the direction of history. And now that history is approaching a very specific moment. First public contact. Because insiders claim that a short teaser video, recorded during a private demonstration, has been cleared for release. If that video drops, even for 30 seconds, and it shows what people think it shows, the world will never think about mobility the same way again. And that brings us to the unanswered question. What happens when the masses realize fueling is optional? What happens when families understand they can drive without paying for gas? When fleets understand they can operate without diesel? When nations realize they can develop without petroleum? When the grid realizes it's no longer mandatory? Those answers are coming, and they're not just disruptive. They're transformational. But we haven't even reached the climax of this story yet, because what's coming next isn't speculation. It's the part investors are preparing for, governments are modeling for. But here's where things get interesting. Because as the video continued, it showed something that immediately caught the attention of analysts. The vehicle's power curve didn't drop. Normally, in any electric vehicle, even a Tesla, the power output visibly declines as the battery drains. It's physics. Voltage drops, thermal loss increases, efficiency falls. But this test? The curve stayed flat. The lab technician paused, zoomed in, and said something that made the tech community replay this clip hundreds of times. There's no net discharge here. This is not normal. Within hours, energy researchers, engineers, and influencers across X and YouTube clipped, slowed down, and broke down the footage frame by frame. Some said the readings must have been faked. Others claimed hidden charging equipment was behind the scenes. But then a transportation researcher in Japan posted something that nobody expected. He uploaded the electrical telemetry data overlay and pointed to a signature he called inductive feedback behavior. In simple terms, the vehicle appeared to be harvesting electromagnetic energy from its own operation, maintaining power without a visible fuel source. To many, that sounded impossible. To others, it sounded familiar. Because years earlier, leaked patents from fringe inventors had discussed similar concepts: self-recharging electromagnetic systems, magnetic flux harvesting, and even zero-loss power loops. Ideas most mainstream engineers laughed at. But if this lab footage was authentic, someone had just taken those theories and turned them into a working prototype. And that brings us back to the central question. Where does Elon Musk fit into all this? Because the truth is, this wasn't the first time he publicly addressed technology that would threaten Tesla's market. During an interview back in 2025, Elon said something cryptic. If someone brings a practical self-powered drivetrain to market, it will change everything. And I'd support it. Most people thought he was being hypothetical. But now, with this lab footage spreading, reporters began asking him directly, is the self-powered vehicle real? And as usual, Elon didn't answer with a simple yes or no. Instead, he replied with a single line that set the entire internet on fire. The tech works. Scaling it is the hard part. Within seconds, that quote went viral. Influencers made reaction videos. Stock analysts speculated on Tesla's future. And energy economists began asking the uncomfortable but inevitable question. What happens to the global oil industry if vehicles no longer need fuel? Because whether you believe in this technology or not, here's a reality most people overlook. The global automotive ecosystem isn't just about cars. It's connected to oil extraction, refining facilities, gas stations, tax revenue, auto service networks, transportation logistics, battery manufacturing, utility grids. A self-powered vehicle doesn't just disrupt automobiles, it disrupts everything around them. And governments know this. Because shortly after Elon's comment, an internal memo leaked from a European automotive regulatory body. The memo discussed the economic destabilization risks of independent power vehicles and even referenced contingency planning for post-fossil mobility systems. That one document signaled something massive. People in positions of authority are taking this seriously. Meanwhile, in the private sector, startups and shadow labs began popping up claiming to be working on similar drivetrain concepts. Electromagnetic feedback loops, zero-point power harvesters, ambient capacitor arrays, self-charging hybrid modules. Most of them won't succeed. But historically, breakthrough technologies don't emerge from the biggest companies first. They come from small teams moving fast without legacy pressure. Just like SpaceX wasn't supposed to beat Boeing. Just like Tesla wasn't supposed to dethrone legacy automakers. But the story doesn't end here. Because after months of silence, the original inventor behind the self-powered vehicle finally broke cover. Not in a keynote speech, not in a press release, but in a low-resolution recorded interview uploaded quietly to a small technology forum. And what he said changed the entire narrative. But here's where the story takes a sharp turn. The moment this vehicle touched real streets, engineers noticed something troubling. If a machine can generate its own power, where does that leave charging networks, gas stations, utility companies, and every industry built around fueling cars? For the first time in decades, the entire energy transport ecosystem felt threatened not by a giant corporation, but by a radical idea. And yet, Musk's confirmation didn't spark panic. It sparked urgency. Automotive labs began quietly investigating similar systems. Battery companies started testing power-dense supercapacitors. Even oil companies began pivoting into grid-scale storage. Because whether it succeeds or not, the concept has already changed the conversation. What if energy inside transportation didn't need refueling ever? And that leads us to the final question. If a self-powered car exists, even as a prototype, does that mean the era of multi-trillion-dollar global fuel systems is officially on a countdown clock? The truth is, no one knows, not even Musk. But one thing is certain. The engine of disruption has already started, and there is no turning it off. Because once an idea escapes into the world, it doesn't need gas, it doesn't need permission, it just needs time.